Om Jnana-timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chaksurumilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Sarasate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastatya Deshatarine Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasati Gaura Bhakta-vrinda Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasati Gaura Bhakta-vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Paripradacharya Ashtottara Sati Srimad AC Bhakti Vedanta Swami Raj Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Prem Sikaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Sri Sri Radha Krishna Gop Gopinath Sham Kund Radha Kundagiri Govardhan Ki Jai Vrindavan Tham Ki Jai Navadip Tham Ki Jai Jagannath Puri Ki Jai Gangamai Ki Jai Jamunamai Ki Jai Tulsi Devi Ki Jai Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Samaveta Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. Gaur Premanande. Welcome to all. Special welcome to Lakshmi Moni Mataji. Om Jnana Timirantasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshun Militam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Sthapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupakada Mahyam Dadhati Shapadantikam Bandeham Shri Guru Shri Jatapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Shagrajatam Sahagana Raganatan Vitamstam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savatutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Pada Sahagana Lalita Sri Vishakhan Vitamstra. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindho Deen Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute. Tapta Kamshana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari. Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hori Priye. Vanchako Patarubhyascha Kripa Sindho Pyevacha. Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda. Shri Advaita Gadadhar. Shiva Shadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Well, again, welcome to our Thursday Istagosthi, where pretty much anything goes. Any topic that you'd like to bring up, feel free to bring up. And let's see what Krishna may desire. I don't have any pre-planned agenda today, and it's really up to you.
Just to get things rolling, I was thinking of something for quite some time, and I have a growing list of questions to ask on Thursday nights, and usually there's some overarching, much more important subject than what I come up with. But I was wondering, this is just in terms of our daily liturgy. For example, when someone recites the Prema Dhwani prayers, everyone hits the floor, and after the end of the Prema Dhwani prayers, everyone says obeisances to their spiritual master. And I wonder how that started and how that became standardized, because sometimes you hear when Prabhupada recites the Prema Dhwani prayers on some recording, the devotees just say, all glories to you, Srila Prabhupada. They're just, I don't know if that's a spontaneous thing. Did Prabhupada teach people what to say at the end of the Prema Dhwani prayers? It seems like sometimes it's different for other people than others. Like, for example, sometimes you see people get up immediately, and I'm still offering my obeisances to, and I just wonder if someone knows how that came to be.
Well, these things were mostly in place when I joined in 1968. So I'm not really able to give much in the way of firsthand reporting. Satsvarup Maharaj would have to be our go-to person. I think he'd be the right person to ask. I know that I remember there was a little meeting where, it's like all glories to the assembled devotees, Hare Krishna. And there was sort of a division of opinion. Should it be Jai Sri Krishna or Hare Krishna? And somehow the Hare Krishnas won out, but they weren't quite sure which one it should be. That much I know. I also know that in Gaudiya Math, they don't all bow down and do what we do. They remain standing, they remain standing. And so it's not like a long tradition. It may be a long ISKCON tradition, but it's not longer than that. That's about all. And I can also say that in Gaudiya Math, they often really go on with the Prema Dhwanis. They glorify lots and lots of entities, and where Srila Prabhupada kept it pretty much to what we usually have. I've, by the way, got a first draft of my book on Srila Prabhupada's Kirtan standards, and it talks about such things as the Prema Dhwani. I'll read you my notes on it.
Oh, Jai.
Not much, pretty skimpy, but let's see. So first I go through, what the Prema Dhwani consisted of, almost invariably. Srila Prabhupada chanted it. I won't go through the whole list right now. Srila Prabhupada sometimes varied this a bit. Sometimes he would switch the order of Tulsi Devi and Bhakti Devi, or Ganga Mai and Jamuna Mai. Sometimes at the end he would glorify a particular occasion. Shri Shri Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj ki Tirubhav Titi Maha Mahotsav ki Jai. On one occasion, he glorified his godbrother, Srila P.R. Sridhar Maharaj. Sometimes he would glorify a disciple. On one occasion in 1967, after a kirtan on San Francisco beach, he added all glories to the Pacific Ocean. But the sequence above is what he usually followed. In his karma, we naturally begin with glorification of Srila Prabhupada. Though we sometimes hear Bhaktivedanta Goswami, this is technically incorrect. Srila Prabhupada's sannyas name is Swami, not Goswami. We also sometimes hear Abhay Charanadavinda, no harm, but Srila Prabhupada chose to style his name A.C. We also sometimes hear and added His Divine Grace and one or more added insertions of Srila. Again, no harm, but one might choose to stick to the way Srila Prabhupada did it, with no His Divine Grace and no added instances of Srila. Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Pariprajapacharya Ashtottara Satasri Srimad includes all that and more. Sometimes devotees add the names of the temple deities or other deities. Srila Prabhupada did not. It is not a requirement. Note too that in the Premadwani, Prem Sikaho, Sri Krishna Chaitanya, Prabhu Nityananda, and so on, and Sri Sri Radha Krishna Gopinath have already been included. I've sometimes been asked, when we do add the names of the deities at the end of the Premadwani, which is the correct order? Do we, as the tradition might expect, start with Gaur Nitai and proceed up to Radha Krishna? Or do we start with Radha Krishna and work our way down to Gaur Nitai and Srila Prabhupada? Which way is right? Since Srila Prabhupada did neither, and it's not part of the tradition, I have no right answer to give other than why do it? In the Gaudiya Mat, the Premadwani often goes on with glorifications at considerable length, so one may extend the glorifications, or like Srila Prabhupada, one might keep them short and simple. So that's what we have there.
Jai, thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
Lalita Prasad Prabhu has a hand up.
Thank you, Hare Krishna Maharaj. Thank you. Wonderful rendition of why, the differences in the other arts. I have a question regarding Janmashtami, Krishna's birthday. There's Malati gave a lecture a few days ago out of New Vrindavan, where she mentions how when Balaram was born of Rohini, hold on, I'm echoing here, that he will just be somewhat detached until he came to, or he went besides Mother Yasoda, and actually she held him and he felt Krishna within her womb. And so that's kind of conflicting the traditional version that Krishna is actually carried by his father to Vrindavan during a rainstorm, and he's transferred. I think it's Yoga Maya, or the baby that is actually born of Mother Yasoda is a female, and is brought back to Kamsa's domain, where it's later killed, and I think it's Durga, and she appears and chastises Kamsa for his heinous acts. So the question is, which story? And it's very confusing because some versions say that, well, Krishna is actually born of Mother Yasoda. Now so why is Balaram embracing Mother Yasoda's womb? I mean, but it's Durga who's within Mother Yasoda, because that's who Vasudeva is transferring. Okay, do you understand my question, or do I have to?
I think so.
Okay.
Basically, is Krishna born of Yashoda Mai or is Krishna born of Devaki? That's the essence of the question. We hear two different versions. Yeah. So it gets, of course, in the Bhagavatam, straightforwardly we hear that he's transferred from the mind of Vasudeva to the mind of Devaki, and then he's carried across the Jamuna. That's the sort of simple story. But our acharyas have given an alternative understanding that Krishna simultaneously was born of Yashoda Mai. That and then when Krishna was carried across the Jamuna, the Krishna who was carried across merged with the Krishna who was already there, and with Yashoda Mai, and that's how things work. I hope I have that story right, because I hear it, but I haven't read it in the first-hand sources, I don't think. So you get different accounts, and this is the nature of Krishna Lila, that it's seen in different ways by different devotees. It's not, what is that? Rahasya, it's mysterious. Krishna's birth and activities are mysterious. So they get mysterious and more mysterious, because the acharyas go deeper in and find things that we didn't know before, or things that we haven't heard before, or things that seem contradictory. And yet they arrive at these understandings by their research in different scriptures, or by their realization in different ways. Is that okay?
Yes, Maharaj, thank you very much. Quite confusing, but and there's even opens up more questions, but for now it suffices to say that I'm satisfied with your answer. Thank you very much.
I'm sorry I don't have the details of that story. I'm sure that like Hari Parshad or someone like that would really be able to. Tell me, Lakshmi Mani?
It's in the Gopala Champu.
It's in Gopal Champu? Yeah. You're very faint.
Sorry, it's in Gopal Champu, yes.
That's where it is. Jiva Goswami's.
Yeah, and there's other things in there that are equally, or if not more, confusing. So tread gently when you walk there.
Yes, God is mysterious. Thank you very much. That's a good answer.
Hare Krishna.
Just to keep the ball rolling, some weeks have passed, you mentioned that there was a colorful story associated with Edward Dimmock's writing the preface to Bhagavad Gita as it is, but time didn't allow that story to be told.
No, it wasn't that time didn't allow it. It's that discretion didn't allow it.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
Well,
can we throw discretion to the wind?
No, I don't think we should.
okay.
We could turn off the cameras. The video
recording.
I guess it's too colorful.
We could do that. But anyway, discretion is what prevented us.
Better part of valor.
Mm-hmm.
Well, failing that question, then another one had occurred to me today, that whether you would, in maintaining this Istagosthi format, prefer that the Sangha remain as it is, or is this sort of event something that you would like to open up to a wider audience, say, not necessarily all practicing sadhakas, but more a wider reach in terms of the kind of questions that you'd get?
I'm open.
Okay. Meena has a hand up.
Mm. Yes,
Sorry.
Meena.
Hare Krishna.
It's one of those Mina questions. Over the last little while, I've come into contact with devotees who are very belligerent and seem to have lost their faith in the process Prabhupada's given, who have all kinds of misgivings about ISKCON and ISKCON leadership. And they seem to have developed their own ideas about what should be done. And then, so there are all these little subgroups that I've been coming into contact with. It's kind of like mumbling and grumbling in these different subgroups. None of them can agree with each other, but everyone seems to have some anger or frustration with ISKCON from maybe their experiences, something that happened. And I've just been trying to look at that, and I'm like, you know, how does that work? These people have been practicing Krishna consciousness. They meditate on Prabhupada. They have Bhagavad Gita. They have Srimad Bhagavatam. So what is it that's putting them in the spot to actually offend devotees who are dedicating their lives to spreading Krishna consciousness? And I'm like, what puts them in that spot where they offend the devotees that are serving? I don't know if you want to look at that or not, but I've been struggling with this for like a week or two, and I'm learning a lot from the struggle. I'm learning a lot from the struggle to try to understand it.
There are devotees who are belligerent and grumpy and have all sorts of gripes about ISKCON, and they say things that are offensive. So what brings that on? Well, first of all, ISKCON brings it on. To be fair, the acts of our leaders are not always perfect. They're not always close to perfect. They're sometimes not even close to decent, and that can be frustrating. The people they can feel that they've been deprived of their service, or that the society they joined has been led astray, that it's off course, that something very wonderful has been spoiled. And in so many ways, they can feel discontent. That is not entirely unjustified. There are things that are not always right with the society. And Srila Prabhupada himself knew that and acknowledged that sometimes. So that's one contributing factor. The other is what shall we say? I wouldn't say a loss of faith in Krishna. That's not necessarily what brings this on. As you say, you know, these are good devotees sometimes. You know, they're chanting and what have you. But anger, Trividham Narakasyedam Dwaram Nashanam Atmana. In the Bhagavad Gita, there are 3 paths to destruction, nashan. Kama, krodha, tata, lobhas, lust and greed and anger. So if we let our anger run away with us, which is not so hard, you know, you when things are disturbing, when you've dedicated your life to something and it seems to have gone off course or somehow becomes a frustrating instead of a joyful experience, then we may start on the road toward anger. And if we're not careful, then that anger starts to grow and grow and grow and grow. And then it's hard to control. Like fire and death and disease, they're controllable in the beginning, but very difficult to control later on. So we see people who essentially ruin their spiritual progress by becoming so angry that they become offensive to devotees, or they just become, so sour that they stop reading, they stop chanting, or they get on some jag and their spiritual life consists of, you know, doing all sorts of research to and coming up, or with or without research, coming up with arguments about why this person or that person or the third person is, plague upon the surface of the earth. And, they poisoned the Prabhupada, and, on and on it goes. So that can be extremely destructive. Therefore, one has to be careful. Anger can really ruin us. Anger can really ruin us. At the same time, there's, anger has its place. Hanuman got angry and practically destroyed Lanka. So it's not that we just, oh yeah, they did this, they did that. It's all well anyway. There are times when one should become indignant, where one should become outraged, where anger is justified. And if we don't become angry, then what's wrong with us? But we need to be so careful that anger doesn't get out of hand and lead to offenses. Those are some thoughts. Did you have some thoughts from your experience and realizations that you want to share? You're muted. There you go.
Hare Krishna. I'm still trying to process, this. So I'm appreciating, what you're saying. And yeah, it's just, you can't think straight. When anger comes, the thinking, you can't, it's like a lower mode thing, passion and ignorance. But to really, you have to be in the mode of goodness. You really do have to be peaceful and feel happy. And if you're not happy and you're angry, you can't think straight. It's like a lower mode thing.
Yeah, krodhat bhavati sammoha. From anger comes complete bewilderment. Sammohat smriti vibrama. We forget what's what. Smriti bramshad buddhi nasha. Then our intelligence is wiped out. And buddhi nashat pranashati. When our intelligence is wiped out, we're finished. So that can happen. We have to be so careful. Thank you for that. Atina has her hand up.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, Dandavat Pranams. Well, I feel like I'm taking this a little bit of a different course, but this was actually related to the previous, we just started a new chapter in Bhakti Center Srimad and you spoke this morning. But I had missed about like 2 weeks of it, and I caught up by reading the 13th, just the verse of the 13th chapter. It's about how Maharaj Nimi was cursed to die, and then he counter cursed, and then the whole lineage and all of that. But it was just a thought that I had as you also know, as I try to, I don't want to say completely reconcile some of the philosophies of other faiths, but what I find is because we have so much information and knowledge, then we might be applying a disproportionate percentage of the reasoning behind things to a systematic process. And so, for example, we are told that how souls come about, or living entities, in one sense, it's through the rains, and then through the grains, and then the man eats the grains, and then through the semen, blah blah blah. It's like it's a loop. It's such a systematic thing. But you see that there's so many cases where that's not the case. Even how Draupadi came about was through a yagya. She came out of the fire, or the yagya, and then here the churning of Maharaj Nimi's body came about a son. And the same thing with like King Vena, and then obviously with how the Pandavas came about was through a mantra. And then even if you would think about how fish aren't eating grains and it's training, and we believe they have souls, plants and flowers, obviously that's not how it works either. And so this is kind of a general thought, and I would love your, comments or thoughts about this, of how what I find is because that might be one system, it's not, it perhaps isn't the full, or it's just a smaller percentage than God. I don't know, it could be imbuing a soul. I think that's what the Abrahamics believe, which is God like blew a soul into a body, something like that. That you see all these examples where clearly it's not that systematic approach where a soul is implanted into a material body, from humans to fish to clams to plants. And then related to that, something separate around karma, but I'll pause there, and I'd love to hear your thoughts around that. Thank you.
Yeah, this description of the living entity descending from the higher planets in the form of rain, and then the rain being transferred, essentially the soul being transferred from rain to grain, and grain to man, and man to woman, comes from the Chandogya Upanishad, if I recall. And it only applies to a portion of the living entities. This is not meant to be the full story of how every living entity is born. But particularly, the explanation has to do with those who are performing fruitive activities and are elevated to the heavenly planets. In the Bhagavad Gita, Gatagatam Kama Kama Labhante, one is promoted to the heavenly planets, and then Kshine Punye Martya Lokam Vishanti, our piety runs out and we come back down. So that's the portion of the living beings who are being described, those who are elevated to heaven and then descend again. They descend in this way. Although they may descend in some other way, there's always, material nature always has another trick up her sleeve. But generally, this is the description. They descend this way, and then they go up again and they come down again. But so your observation is right. There's all sorts of other ways that people are born, from fire, from the usual sexual process, and so on. So it's not that we have too much knowledge, but sometimes we don't have enough. We know how something happens, but it's not the whole story. And so we need to have that contextualized. Is that okay?
Thank you so much. Yes, you said it properly, I guess. Thank you. Not having the complete, we assume or apply a small portion to the whole pie. Yeah. I wanted to actually, if okay, extend this to get your thoughts. What I find, and this is just a personal, as I just go deeper into my spiritual exploration and also just having contact with others in other religions and just having intellectual discussions. I have I'm a very black and white person and tend to be extreme, and that's how I understand things, is kind of putting things into compartments. But I'm really trying to have this idea of and both, not either or. It's not karma or God's hand and God testing. It's both karma and God testing you and God's hand. And of course, we take this perspective that, at least from my understanding, hearing from devotees, that okay, when one turns to God, then God takes his hand in one's life. But until then, you're on your karma. But of course, we see that there's divine interventions all the time, even to atheists and those who haven't completely, I guess, remembered God or awakened to God in this lifetime. I can talk from my personal standpoint. When I was a young kid, God intervention. Then when I wasn't fully awakened, right, to God or practicing in a certain path. But because we have this concept of karma, when we know the three roles of material, I would say how the three laws of this material universe, karma, the three modes in time. Please correct me wrong. My sense, especially here from devotees, that we put a very large proportionate of the explanation of why things happen to karma, and less so to God and God's will, God's plan. And so if I were to take a full 100%, I would say most devotees would say, even devotees when they say, oh, I've taken a Krishna consciousness, is that perhaps 80% of what happens in our lives is due to karma and maybe 20% to God. Whereas I would flip it and actually say, I think in the Abrahamic religions, they believe 100% of everything happening is because of God and God's hand. And before I go down this road, what I wanted to just take a step back is I'm part of this group and just completely separate from Christian consciousness and trying to just develop. I'm pivoting my business and all of that. And they're, one sense, many of them are spiritualists, but they're in what we say the lower realization of God, the universe, like the universe, like is telling me this to do this. They can't recognize God, but they believe in kind of this universal, what we would consider the group, I'm guessing, this is kind of the universe. And so they believe perhaps in fate and karma and energy, but because they can't realize the higher form of God, Bhagavan, again, only attributing to universe, I would say for us, honestly, when we believe everything is really because of karma, that's such a generalist, impersonalist view, because it's saying, oh, karma is just, I would say, even just slightly above the universal form, because it's just a law that was put in place. Oh, I'm sorry. 1 second, sorry.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Ram.
Ram, Ram, Hare, Hare.
I apologize. My groceries are coming up. I'm sorry. So when too much, I think, devotees, because we have this information of karma, and we see even in Christian faith, it's you reap what you sow, do upon others as you want done unto yourself. That you can say it is karma, but they really don't put too much emphasis on it. So and my sense is, because we know the 3 rules of material nature, or the universe, and then reincarnation and how we get this bodies that are karma and desires, there's kind of this more emphasis on karma. My sense, and even my personal experiences, is that while karma and God's hand and God's will and God's testing does all exist, devotees put a disproportionate amount of reasoning behind what things happen, too much to karma, when in reality, perhaps reality, and we can't say, is that it's 90% God's plan and his will and his testing, and 10% karma. Karma is there, but we have it flipped. And then, none of our literature talks about, say, Satan or anything, but of course, there's demons all around, and those who, you can even be in the form of like a past friend who's whispering in your ear, like, go to the bar, do this, why do you go to church, something like that. But and I'd love to hear your thoughts. My general sense is, especially within the devotee community, because we have this knowledge, but a not true understanding. And we like to say, oh, anything ambiguous is karma is so intricate, it's like this banyan tree, the roots of a banyan, it's so deep, we can't understand it. So we apply ambiguity to karma and not understanding. Whereas I think most Abrahamic religions and believers would say, God knows best. We can't, in one sense, then they surrender to God. They are the ones. Thank you. Coming 1 second. I'm sorry. Sorry.
Hare Krishna,
I'm sorry. So if I were to look in the spectrum where we, even as Gaudiya Vaishnavas, say we're quote unquote, I don't want to say better than the impersonalists and the yogis, because we've realized we're going for Bhagavan realization, not Paramatma or Brahman realization. Then I would even say in the spectrum, when one attributes absolutely everything to God's will, God's hand, that's higher than us going, well, it's karma, it's this. And and could be who I am hearing from, a relationship, I just think when we don't have an intricate knowledge, or perhaps there is, but that's not our focus. Our focus is on Srimad Bhagavatam, CC, Bhagavad Gita, on this karma. We don't truly actually understand it. And perhaps it's only 10% of all the reasoning of what's happening. And we have a misunderstanding and attributing too much of the percentage of what happens in our lives, why things happen, to karma versus maybe Satan or God's plan and will for you. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much.
So it's a a question of proportion. To what extent is stuff happening because of karma, and to what extent is it happening because of God's direct intervention or supervision or his hand in matters. And then there's always the possibility of Satan as an independent force. So that's I think, the essence of it, right?
Yes, thank you.
So the first thing is that we're in agreement that 100% of everything happens because of God. That's, as Prabhupada said, not a blade of grass moves without the will of God. So how is that 100%? When we have karma, we have that. That's, what is that? Mayadya Kshena Prakriti Suyate Sufratra. If the laws of nature themselves are working under the supervision of the personality of Godhead, the laws of nature themselves are working under the supervision of the personality of Godhead. So even karma, or even things that appear to be automatic, are ultimately under Krishna's control. So we come to 100%. Now the remaining question, however, is to what extent does karma run things? And to what extent is God directly involved? In the 3rd chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Prakrite Kriyamanani Gunai Karmani Sarvasha. It said that Prakriti, or material nature, is making everything happen. Gunai Karmani Sarvasha. All action is happening because of material nature. And Ahankara Vimudhatma, completely bewildered by false ego, we think, Kartaham, I'm making it happen. Kartaham. So that's the first thing. We think that we are independently making stuff happen. It's all happening because of my effort, or because of my intelligence, or because of my beauty, or because of my wealth, or my connections, or this or that. I'm able to make this happen. But in fact, it's all happening because of material nature. And if material nature were to make things happen otherwise, we would be helpless. We can't reverse it. A simple example, you take birth in a particular family, you can't do anything about that. We don't have a reverse birth discipline in the sciences where they could say, okay, you didn't like, like you don't like your teeth, we'll fix them. You don't like your nose, we'll fix it. You don't like the way you'd rather have been born in America than Ecuador. Okay, fine. We'll reverse that. It's done by material nature, and we have no say in the matter. Death also, you can't do anything about it. You can call doctors, and you can try this, you can try that, but finally death is inevitable. And that's not because of, somebody has it in for us. That's nature. I've talked about this in my book, to what extent things are due to nature. And really, practically everything seems to be by nature. You're born in a particular family, so you're going to speak a certain language, you're going to like a certain kind of food, you're going to learn certain customs, you're going to have a certain social status, all just because of birth, over which we have no control. You're going to be thin, or you're going to be fat, or you're going to be healthy or unhealthy. So much is just beyond our control. And Bhagavad Gita says it's all happening because of Prakriti, because of material nature. Now, if everything's happening by material nature, then where does that leave us? And Baladev Vidyabhushan argues that all can't be taken literally here, otherwise there'd be no use of Shastra. Krishna says, surrender to me. But why should he say that to Arjuna? Why doesn't he say, to material nature, make Arjuna surrender now. But because he's addressing Arjuna, it means Arjuna has the choice, surrender, not surrender. So we have, as Srila Prabhupada said, tiny independence. So tiny independence gives us a little bit of freedom, but not a whole heck of a lot. The rest is happening because of forces beyond our control. Now, then the question comes, well, those forces beyond our control, are they the forces of material nature, or are they the workings of God? Now, to a certain extent, it's a question of how you look at it, because the devotee sees even the actions of material nature to be ultimately God's arrangement for him. And he sees it that way. He sees Krishna's hand behind everything. That's his vision. So the materialist, everything's happening just by material nature, and there's no God even to talk about or think about, or no God enters the picture. But the devotee sees God everywhere. Even if material nature is acting, that's God acting. So he sees divinity wherever he looks. Then the question comes, however, to what extent should we all take it that God is personally intervening, as he did when he saves the life of Maharaj Parikshit, for example, or when he lifted Govardhan Hill to rescue the Brajbasis from Indra's anger, or when he does many other things that we read in Bhagavatam are his direct actions. When do we look at it that way? And I would be careful of saying, well, 90% of the time, because then God has to be busy doing things like making sure that a praying mantis attacks a particular other insect because of whatever reason he has. He feels there's a need for divine intervention here. There's and just transfer that to human affairs, petty human affairs, which means practically all of human affairs. Why does God have to get into it? Why does God have to micromanage all the affairs of this world? Why should he? What reason? What purpose? Why not delegate and say, okay, material nature, you handle this? Or in fact, he doesn't even have to say it. Material nature automatically knows this is what I have to do. And then, yes, God reserves to himself the right to intervene whenever he so pleases. But why should he intervene 90% of the time in stuff that material nature can handle? You were careless with the fire, you got burned. Why does God have to make sure that you got burned? Or why does God have to make sure that you were just far enough away from the fire that you didn't get burned? Why does God have to get into all of these small and large matters? Why does God have to determine who escapes from Afghanistan and who doesn't? Why does he have to stick his fingers into everything? There doesn't seem to be a reason to suppose that God oversteps the functions, the duties, the work of material nature most of the time. But extraordinarily, to save the life of Parikshit Maharaj, Krishna enters the womb of Uttara. And to do many other things. To save the life of Prahlad Maharaj, he kills Hiranyakashipu. So there are certainly instances where God does directly intervene, or even arrange for things to happen without his apparent direct intervention. Yasyaham manugranami harishe tadanam shanai. Krishna says, if I'm really favorable to someone, I make sure that he loses all his capital. I take all his money away. Now that doesn't mean Krishna, extends it all of a sudden everyone sees this great divine hand, snatching away all the money. But in the background, although it seems that by some ordinary process, the money is being lost, the devotee recognizes that there's divinity in the background. There's Krishna's will in the background. And that's especially when the devotees are involved. That's where Krishna involves himself. When Arjuna is to be killed by Bhishma Dev, then Krishna goes to the extent of breaking his promise to save the life of Arjuna. So Krishna can and does get involved in human affairs. But as far as my reading of the Shastras is concerned, it doesn't look like he does it most of the time. But extraordinarily, when he wants to show special favor to a devotee, or when he wants to curb down the demons. How's that?
Thank you so much, Maharaj, for such a detailed answer. If I could share with you, I guess, some additional thoughts or concerns. I would say that what you presented, and you would say from, obviously, interpretation from our Shastra, but if I were to take a step back, I would say that sounds very impersonal. Not saying that God doesn't have a form, but he's
Why
not.
Why impersonal?
Because he doesn't. So you had mentioned at the very end that it's material nature, or sorry, God will intervene when he wants, but he most likely won't. But see, if I'm a very visual person, and if I could just give an example, because we constantly say that God, say, is the programmer. He created this virtual reality and he created this code, and within it is time, 3 modes, and karma. And then it's kind of like he programmed it. And because he's the programmer and everything is an extension of Krishna, then that's our understanding going, well, then everything's Krishna, because not a blade of grass moves without Krishna sanctioning it. But it's not him actively sitting at the computer and making every decision, as you mentioned, the praying mantis and so on and so forth. But one thing that I'm thinking of is, so because in one sense we're finite and our minds are finite, we go, well, Krishna is the supreme enjoyer, so he's just playing in the spiritual world. But then my question is, God is all powerful, omnipotent. He can be playing all the time and also be involved in almost every action. He has that ability.
He can. Hold on a second. He can. There's nothing to prevent God from being involved in in all of the tiniest decisions if he so wants to be. He can decide every microscopic issue that might need decision. There's no problem for him to do that. But does he? Do we have reason to think from Shastra that he does? And it seems that we don't. The general statement is, this is all assigned to Prakriti. And it's not impersonal, it's just good management. In a business, you don't expect your boss to be coming into your office and reviewing with you everything. Or let's take, not your boss, but the assembly line of Ford Motor Company. You don't really expect the CEO to be right there next to every worker, or next to any worker for that matter, seeing how the bolts are being put on the rear door of a Ford, whatever it is. He doesn't do that. Not because he's just incapable of doing it, but why? It's unnecessary. So God has his arrangement. Svabhavaki Jnana Bala Priyaksha. God has his energies. They do these things. It's not impersonal. It's the nature of this person that he has energies that do things. And he has his pleasure energy, which is also another energy of the Lord. That energy, if you approach, you'll get dealt with a different way. But if you wanted to exploit the resources of the material nature, then all right, material nature will deal with you. Prabhupada gives the example that a man puts a wayward son under the care of a stern taskmaster. It's not because the father has no love for the child or because the father has no personal feeling. But I had a cousin. That's exactly what she did with her son. He was, incorrigible. I forget what his problems were. Drugs were involved and this and that. And she put him in a really stern program. And that program turned him around. And it's not because my cousin didn't love her son or had no feeling. It's because, we need to deal. This is a suitable way to deal with this boy. So this is what Krishna does. If you want really intimate personal dealings, you're in the wrong place. This is not where Krishna does that sort of thing. That's the spiritual world. God's so capable. He's dancing with 16,108. He's marrying 16,108. If you want to be 109, Krishna can accommodate. There's no problem. Prabhupada said he can marry 16 million wives. So the full capability is there. But why does God want to get into all of that? Dealing with the life of every insect and every bug, every bird, every monkey. Why should God occupy himself in these petty affairs when he can delegate them to one of his energies and handle it that way? Now, that said, again, the other side of it is that the devotee in his own life can look at things differently. We know that material nature is behind everything. We know that so much, but we can experience or feel or by our Krishna consciousness, we can feel the presence of Krishna in all these things. The same things that we could objectively look at and say, okay, that was a reaction to this is a reaction to something, who knows which. It's all material nature acting. But the devotee, because he has love for Krishna, feeling for Krishna, he feels Krishna is so kind that he smashed me here, or Krishna is so kind that he saved me there, or Krishna is so kind that he had me turn right when I could have turned left. He sees God's hand in everything. So that's a kind of divine vision, or the feeling of the devotee that Krishna's seeing Krishna's presence everywhere, especially the first class devotee. He sees Krishna's work everywhere. He sees Krishna's hand everywhere. He tastes water and he tastes, oh, this is Krishna. He sees the moon. He says, oh, this is Krishna. He sees the light of the sun. He says, oh, this is Krishna. So he sees Krishna everywhere. He doesn't see just the mechanical workings of the sun and the moon and H2O and all of that. He sees Krishna. So that's the perfection of Krishna consciousness. And we don't want to rule that out by some sort of mechanistic worldview or sort of combined divine and mechanistic worldview, where there's everything is mechanistic, but there's a divinity who's someplace far removed from it all and empowering it and then going about his business elsewhere. We can hope to see Krishna's personal presence in everything. That's by Krishna consciousness. We can hope to see that, so that one sees, what is that? Stavra Jangama Deki Nadeki Dharamurti. Wherever the devotee goes, Ishtadevas, he sees Krishna's there. He sees Krishna's there. But the two things are not mutually exclusive. They're two different ways of looking at things. There are two different ways of looking at things. And you can say that one is by knowledge and another is by love. But that might be saying too much. I haven't heard Prabhupada say it that way. But the devoted, but we saw that Prabhupada said some, like things that we might say that was just something that happened. Probably Krishna has done this, Krishna has done that, Krishna has done this, Krishna has done that. So the devotees sees Krishna active everywhere. And at the same time, philosophically, he understands material nature is working and this and that. But he thinks that Krishna is so kind that, I only got this instead of getting that. Sudama Brahman. Well, that was a direct feeling with Krishna. But anyway, I think you get my point.
Thank you so much, Maharaj. It's a long topic, and I'd love to. I know we're coming. Time is up, and I think I guess others wanted to comment, but that was a very thorough explanation. Thank you so much. More for me to chew on, and hopefully maybe pick your brain. Further thoughts that I have on this topic. I guess at the next Istagosthi. So thank you so much, Maharaj.
Okay, if you pick my brain, I'll just take it as my karma. Or else God's arrangement, one or the other, I'm not sure which.
I think there's another element to this also in the devotee's perception of his own fallen nature. That, there's a certain level of humility that's required or even very desirable or even essential. Prabhupada says it's in the first item that's essential in the process of knowledge is humility. And in the humility of a devotee, he sees that his stupidity, his material desire, his lack of qualification, his attachment to the material world results in him being manipulated or getting feedback from the material energy rather than, and also from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But he doesn't think himself worthy of Krishna intervening directly in his life. He says, I acted like an idiot. I deserve to get kicked in the butt. And that's what happened. So there is an element of that causes devotees to consider taking responsibility for their own, what we call bad karma, or their own reactions that they get, because for billions of lifetimes we've been chasing after material things, and there's reactions for that. I was just hearing this, and I'm thinking, well, wait a minute, because a devotee really feels very responsible for his own suffering. And like you said at the very end, he actually feels he deserved more suffering. And if he got less, it's because of Krishna's mercy, because he definitely didn't deserve less. He deserved more, but Krishna's been kind to him, so he only lost one eye and not two.
Well, thank you for that. Okay. We have reached 8:03. And, well, there are two things. Suman has brought some prasadam for me, so I could take that. On the other hand, if I go downstairs directly and take prasadam later, we can close out by hearing the kirtan downstairs. Or I could have him bring my phone downstairs and I could sit there and he can get the kirtan. I'll take a little prasadam and go. Anyway, I'll make an arrangement one way or the other, either on the, well, I have to switch to my phone either way to do this. So I'll arrange my phone to join the kirtan, and I'll either join it immediately or shortly thereafter. But one way or the other, the phone will be there. And you're welcome to stay and hear the Thursday night kirtan at the Bhakti Center.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you all very much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
And I'll try not to, well, if I turn off my microphone, then you shouldn't get feedback as I switch from one device to another. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
In fact, I can just drop out here, and if you stay on, Kendra Prabhu, you can admit me again under my other identity.
Sure. And I just wanted to say, everyone, what if you had questions that didn't get addressed this time, save them, write them down, and feel free to invite friends to this meeting. And we hope to see you all next Thursday. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Haribo.
Thank you.
All right.
Krishna.